My ex blew our family's holiday fund at a strip club, ghosted our 4-year-old daughter for months, and now wants baby clothes for the child he had with his new girlfriend while we were trying again. I, 32 female, had been with my partner, 35 male, for several years, and we had a daughter together. Since she was born, I had taken on most of the parenting responsibilities. He was a good dad in many ways and clearly loved her, but when it came to day-to-day parenting, the feeding, the bedtime routine, the emotional labor, that mostly fell on me. He had always liked going away. Nothing extravagant, a night or two here and there, to visit his daughter from a previous relationship or go on camping trips with friends. I didn't resent that in theory. His daughter lives quite far away, and I always supported that relationship. But what caused repeated problems was his complete lack of communication. He had a habit of either not telling me about his trips at all, or mentioning them so vaguely I couldn't even consider them confirmed. Then the weekend would roll around and he'd be packing a bag, telling me he had told me, and that I must have just forgotten. This became a pattern, and I started to second-guess myself constantly. A few times, all before COVID, he booked weekends to see his daughter, without checking with me. Once, I'd arranged for my mom to babysit, so we could celebrate our anniversary. Another time, I needed him to stay home with our daughter while I attended a baby shower. There was even a theater night with a friend I had to cancel. Every time, he insisted he forgot about my plans, but somehow never forgot his. I didn't ask him to cancel on his daughter. It wouldn't have been fair, so I just rearranged things myself and moved on. Then COVID happened, and with restrictions, the travel slowed down. But the moment things eased, he picked up where he left off. Meanwhile, I had never had a single night away from our daughter. Not one. I had planned a couple of trips with friends, but lockdowns always got in the way. Still, he continued to say, "You can go away anytime." But that wasn't really true. Someone had to be home with our daughter. My parents weren't comfortable watching her overnight, and he was always away. So, this summer, I finally planned 2 days to see a friend. I gave him plenty of notice. I needed it for my own sanity, just a couple of nights to reset. I told him the dates clearly. His response? "You can't go then, I'm going on a cycling trip." I was stunned. When had he planned this? Of course, he claimed he'd told me, and I'd just forgotten. Again, I knew he hadn't. Not even a passing mention. Then he asked me to cancel my trip. "You can see your friend any time," he said. That was the final straw. I told him no. I wasn't rearranging again. I had been the one to cancel, compromise, and adapt for years. This time I had made the plans first. This time, he could rearrange. He sulked. Went quiet. Threw out a few passive-aggressive comments like, "Must be nice to just take off whenever you want," as if I had been hopping on planes for fun. I reminded him that he had been away overnight multiple times since our daughter was born, and I hadn't once. The truth was, I didn't mind being the primary caregiver. But I did mind being treated like my time didn't matter. I minded being told I could go anytime when it was never actually supported with action. I minded that whenever his plans and my plans collided, mine were always the ones that got pushed aside. Then, about 4 months after the last incident, I decided to try a different approach. I had a long, calm conversation with my partner. I told him we needed a better system for managing our time and responsibilities, especially since our daughter depended on both of us. I brought up the idea, suggested by others, of using a shared family calendar. The rule would be simple. If it's not on the calendar, it doesn't exist. That way, there'd be no more of the "you forgot" or "I told you" arguments. To my relief, he agreed. He even seemed somewhat enthusiastic about it. I reminded him about my trip, the one I had tried to take months ago, and ended up canceling. I marked it clearly on the calendar, told him the dates, and confirmed he would be home to look after our daughter. He nodded, said he'd move his cycling trip, and I naively thought we had turned a corner. Maybe, I hoped, he was finally starting to take me and my time seriously. Then came the morning of my trip. He often got up early, so I didn't think much of it when he quietly got out of bed. I assumed he was taking the bins out or starting laundry. I rolled over, half asleep, and drifted off again. But when I got up about an hour later, something felt off. The house was too quiet. His keys were gone. The car was missing. I checked the kitchen, the backyard, the garage, nothing. I started calling him. Straight to voicemail. A pit started forming in my stomach. I texted my friend to let her know I might miss my train. Then, out of a weird sense of dread, I asked our neighbor who has a key to his garage to check if his bike was still there. It wasn't. That was the moment I knew. He had gone. He had taken his cycling trip anyway. I stood there in the hallway, phone in hand, stunned. It wasn't just disrespectful. It was deliberate. Finally, around midday, he called. No apology. No explanation. Just casually told me he'd gone on the trip and that I should check the calendar. I did. He had tipexed over my writing and scribbled in his trip on top of mine. The rage I felt in that moment was white hot. I said a few things I won't repeat. He actually had the audacity to say this was my fault for not waking up earlier. Like this was some sort of twisted competition. I told him he had officially won. He could go on as many cycling trips as he wanted now because I was done. Truly done. That weekend, my friend invited me and our daughter to join her and her son for a beach day. It felt like a lifeline. We walked along the shore, shared ice cream, laughed, and let the kids run wild. I felt more peace in those few hours than I had in months. When Sunday came, he returned like nothing had happened. I calmly asked him to leave. Our daughter was there, and I didn't want a scene. He shrugged me off, said he wasn't going anywhere. He even had the nerve to say he'd watch our daughter next week so I could make up for the trip I missed, like that somehow erased what he'd done. I told him he completely missed the point again. It wasn't just about a trip. It was about respect, and the lack of it had finally broken something in me. I called my brother. Within the hour, he came and picked us up. My daughter and I stayed at his house while I sorted through the practicalities of the split. I was emotionally drained, but also relieved. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't trying to make excuses or hold everything together. I was just done. My ex called constantly, texted nonstop, showed up at my brother's house, where, thankfully, my brother turned him away at the door. A few days later, he finally apologized. A real apology, not the dismissive, "I'm sorry you feel that way" kind. But it was too late. I told him I appreciated the apology, but it didn't change anything. I didn't have the energy anymore. I didn't have the will. And honestly, I didn't have any love left for someone who had spent years treating me like a backup plan instead of a partner. A year had passed since I left him. We had a 4-year-old daughter together, and despite everything, I had really tried to make co-parenting work. After the breakup, he seemed to finally understand that he had responsibilities, that being a father required more than just dropping in and out when it suited him. For a little while, it looked like things were improving. He was picking her up on time, asking about her day, even helping with little things like buying new shoes or attending her playgroup sessions. But then he met someone new. Almost immediately, his interest in our daughter began to wane. Calls went unanswered. Weekends he had previously committed to suddenly weren't good anymore. He became harder to pin down, and when I did reach him, he was always busy, always distracted. I stopped trying to chase him. I've always believed that if someone wants to be in a child's life, they'll make the effort. You shouldn't have to beg them. And then 3 months ago, he started showing up again, sending long, heartfelt texts about how much he missed our daughter, how he realized he'd made mistakes, how he wanted to be present and consistent. He told me he had broken up with the woman he'd been seeing and that things were different now, that he was different now. I tried to keep it strictly about our daughter. I really did. But part of me, the part that had cried behind closed doors for months watching our daughter ask why her daddy wasn't coming, still wanted to believe him. And maybe, if I'm being completely honest, there was still a part of me that missed what we used to be. The promise of a family. The possibility of healing. He started helping more again. Pickups, drop-offs, meals. We had a few dinners and he brought up the idea of trying again. Dating, slowly. Seeing where things could go. At first, I resisted. But the way he was with our daughter again, the joy on her face when he walked in, the stories they would make up together, it chipped away at my resolve. I let myself believe that maybe this was it. Maybe we could put the pieces back together for her, for us. He suggested we plan a small holiday, just the 3 of us. Something light, simple, to make new memories. I agreed. We started putting money aside in a jar I kept at my place. It was nothing major, just loose cash whenever we had extra. But over a few weeks, it added up to about £300. We kept talking about where to go. A beach, maybe a cabin in the woods. I started looking up places at night after our daughter went to bed, dreaming just a little. Then, this past weekend, he came by and said he'd take the money to book something. He said he'd put in a little more on top of it and surprise us with the plan. I was caught off guard but didn't question it too much. We were getting close to the end of the school term, and time was moving fast. I handed him the jar. And then nothing. He didn't show up the next day. Or the next. I assumed maybe he was working or got tied up, and since we weren't living together, I didn't think too much of it. Until I got a message this morning from one of his friend's girlfriends. She wrote, "Hey, I wasn't sure if I should tell you this, but I figured you'd want to know. They were all at a stag do this weekend, and your ex was apparently dropping cash like crazy. My boyfriend said he bragged about having extra money lately." My stomach dropped. I knew. I didn't want to believe it, but I knew. I texted him immediately. At first, he tried to deny it, said he'd never do that, said his friend was exaggerating. But I kept pressing. Finally, he admitted it. He had taken the money. All of it. Our holiday fund. Mine, his, and our daughter's, and used it to party with his friends. Drinks, food, God knows what else. He promised he would pay it back soon.
As if that made it okay.
I felt hollow. Not just from the betrayal, but from the weight of what I had allowed myself to believe again. I wanted so badly to give my daughter a whole family. I wanted to believe he had changed. That maybe time and failure had humbled him. But this was just the same selfishness in a new disguise. He didn't just steal money. He stole trust. He stole the tiny thread of hope I had been holding on to. So that was it. I told him I didn't want to speak to him unless it was directly about our daughter. No more dinners. No more trying again. No more second, third, or fourth chances. 2 months had passed since I finally ended things with my ex. The last straw was when he took the jar of holiday money we'd been saving, supposedly for a family trip, and blew it at a strip club during a stag weekend. I found out through someone else's girlfriend. When I confronted him, he admitted it without much of a fight. That was it for me. We had already been through so much. We broke up the first time after he snuck off on a cycling holiday the same weekend I had told him I was planning to be away with a friend. He left me with no childcare, no communication, and no regard. Still, I gave him another chance months later when he started showing interest in our daughter again. We tried to slowly rebuild, but I should have known better. I wasn't naive enough to think he had changed, but I let myself believe that maybe he was trying, for our daughter, if nothing else. And I missed the idea of a family. That hope made me compromise more than I should have. We started seeing each other again, and when he suggested saving for a trip together, I agreed. We kept the money at my place. I never thought he'd actually steal it. After I ended it for good, we stuck to co-parenting, which was going okay. But then came another twist. A few weeks ago, while dropping off our daughter, he casually mentioned that he's going to be a dad again. Apparently, the woman he was seeing, maybe even while we were trying again, was already over 12 weeks pregnant. Then, as if it were nothing, he asked if he could have the baby stuff I'd saved from when our daughter was little. The crib, the clothes, the keepsakes. I told him he was welcome to take anything he personally bought, which was basically one novelty onesie and a hat. The rest?
No.
He looked surprised. Like it hadn't crossed his mind that I'd have a problem with him using things tied to our child and our memories for a baby he conceived while stomping on what is left of our relationship. He acted like I was being cold, unreasonable, like I should be helping him. Then his mother started chiming in. We've always had a decent relationship, but she began pressuring me to give him the baby items, saying the new baby shouldn't suffer, and I didn't need the stuff anymore. But to me, it was never just stuff. It was the principle. It was about boundaries. About finally saying no after years of being stepped on, ignored, and guilt-tripped. So I said no. And then I quietly donated everything to a women's shelter. At least there, it could be put to use by someone who truly needed it, not someone who couldn't even appreciate what he already had. I don't feel guilty. I feel free. 10 months had passed since I finally shut the door on my ex. It was strange how quiet life became without the constant storm of his chaos, but the silence was something I eventually started to treasure. After we ended things, I found out through a mutual friend that the woman he got pregnant had given birth, a boy. I thought it might sting, the idea of him getting the son he always hinted at wanting, but it didn't. There was no pang of jealousy or regret, just numb clarity. I gave him the 2 baby items he'd actually purchased for our daughter, a silly novelty onesie and a hat, and that was that. I kept everything else boxed away until I could donate it to a women's shelter. It felt symbolic in a way, taking the remnants of what we could have been and giving them to someone who might actually find hope in them. What did sting, though, was how fast he began to fade from our daughter's life. At first, he made an effort, picking her up, asking for pictures, sending short videos. She was thrilled. She had a new little half-brother, and she loved the idea of being a big sister. But that interest didn't last. Within a few weeks, The visits became inconsistent. He'd say he was coming, then cancel last minute. She'd wait by the door in her favorite dress, holding a picture she drew for him, only for me to sit next to her hours later trying to explain, again, that something had come up. It killed me every time. I wanted to scream at him, call him out, cut him off completely. But I didn't. I kept my cool. Not because he deserved my grace, he didn't, but because I didn't want our daughter to ever think I stood in the way. I wanted her to know that if he disappeared, it was entirely on him. I made space for him, and he chose not to fill it. I thought about taking him to court. Not to keep him away, but to formalize things, to make him show up with accountability. But I knew it would be more emotional energy than it was worth. I couldn't force him into fatherhood. If he didn't want to be present, no court order was going to change that. My saving grace during all of this was my brother and his wife. They stepped up in ways I never asked them to. My daughter loves them like bonus parents. She lights up when she's with them, and they give her the consistency I can't always provide alone. Watching her thrive in their love reminded me that a family doesn't have to be perfect, just present. As for me, I stopped trying to date. I didn't have the energy for the apps, the small talk, the hope that maybe this time would be different. I threw myself into parenting, rebuilding, and work. And honestly, it paid off. I got a promotion recently, and I've started saving for a small getaway, just me and my daughter. No jars for anyone else to steal from this time. Some nights I still think about what could have been, not because I want him back, but because I mourn the future I once imagined. That's allowed. But I don't miss the man. I miss the dream. And now, I'm finally awake.